Scotch,
Yes.
usually, right? Yeah. Actually, you were the first woman that ever came to our house, and I asked, would you like a drink? And you said, I'll take 2 fingers of Scotch over, I think it was 1 ice cube or something, or it was something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nobody. That was
Yeah,
first.
not a lot of women drink Scotch.
Yeah, not in the U.S.
No.
I think it's more popular in other countries.
Maybe so.
But not here. So, and so we were saying that before. I don't know if it was before we started or after, but this notion of you've done a lot of traveling, and the thing that the people who aren't from here frequently say is Americans should travel more to get a better perspective. So, as someone who's traveled more, in terms of, like how has that altered your perspective? I don't mean like in style and fashion, but like in terms of life in America versus life in other places.
I talk about this a lot with my students at school, that, we're so used to seeing our lives kind of bounded by what I call the curb. We live our lives by the curb. Our life only exists in that moment that we're in at that time. We don't think about, and oftentimes in class I'll ask them, what is your dad doing right now? Can you visualize what your dad is doing at this moment while you're in school? Or what your mother's doing, or the fact that just down the road at the Kroger, there's a woman in there doing her weekly grocery shopping with her toddler in the basket. Do you think about those things? And do you ever think about the fact that there are children your age on the other side of the globe who right now may be sleeping because they've finished their school day? And what does their school day look like? Do you ever think about what is going on the other side of the world? And 99% of them will tell you that thought has never crossed their mind.
Yeah.
Because their reality is bounded by that curb.
So why? So, and I think I know the answer to this, but why is it useful for that thought to cross their mind? Like, do they ever ask you, yeah, but why should it? Like, why should I care about the kid that, like, how does that help me?
Well, because when we start living real life situations like what's going on right now with the war in Ukraine, and how that's affecting other children. And it's been interesting this year because this really has touched us at school more than it normally would, because we have a little population of Polish students who have family, who live very close to where all this unrest is going on. How often do we think about those things? I mean, we see it on the news, but do we put a reality to it? And so when you travel and you go to these places and then you see these things on the news, well, then it becomes very personal because you've had that experience in that place. Yeah. You've been to the Arc de Triomphe, or you've been to the Eiffel Tower.
I've been there.
Or you've been to the Vatican, and you can say, okay, this is more real for me now because I can actually visualize that place. Yeah.
So, and you do that. You do these school trips, right? With kids. What? Now you don't typically go to. I mean, you don't go to difficult parts of the world typically, right? You take them to. But even when you do go to the places, let's see. So I know England. Where else? Greece, I think.
We've been to Greece. Been to this last summer. We went to Amsterdam, Munich, and all over Italy. We drove on it. When we left Munich, we were on a bus. We went through the Alps. We went to Innsbruck. We were in Austria before we headed down into Italy. And we were able to see places. Now, these kids weren't old enough to remember what happened during the Olympics at Innsbruck. But when we were in Innsbruck, you maybe remember that's where they took hostages.
Oh, yeah, right. Right.
So, but when we were in Innsbruck, we were able to go to that memorial and talk about that with them, so that when they do hear those references, those pieces of history, they're still, now they've got something tactile they can hold on to. Yeah. And a memory. I was there. I remember that.
Yeah. So do they... Okay, so another thing that comes up on this show a lot, just kind of finds its way into the conversation. People comment on on my sweater for one thing. I forgot to mention that this we're not entirely sure where I got this. I found it in my closet. I don't think I've ever worn it before, but
I feel like I've seen it before.
But you feel like you've seen it,
which makes me believe that it belongs to one of yours.
Yeah, but it was in my closet and it fits me. And actually, if you were, to be honest, if you were a blind person, you might actually think that you'd have to be blind. This is actually a pretty nice sweater. I mean, it's cotton. It's not like one of those
It's a lovely sweater.
It's not like one of those, except for the sumo wrestler.
Except for the sumo wrestler and the strange pieces of sushi above his head.
The reason why I wanted to work this into the conversation is because it's got this whole multicultural element, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have all that on the Christmas sweater, but it's actually like it's cotton. It's not like the scratchy Christmas rayon sweater, and it's got this guy.
It's a high quality ugly Christmas sweater. Is that what you're trying to say? Yeah,
it is. Except this part is just kind of crappy felt, but the rest of it is pretty nice. So, so you bring kids to all these different international places, and something that comes up a lot here is, I think it's sort of typical of the older generation to always comment on the younger generation and point out all the ways in which they don't make them like they used to, right? Metaphorically, and but it's been coming up a lot lately where people, and it's sort of like it's the combination of, it's kind of the summing up of a generation that is the first one that's like 100% technology, social media, right? So, we're losing our social. So you said this before we started. We were talking about this idea of BrainPub, the BrainPub Network, being a place where we come together and have, like real conversations like we did on our back porch or at the pub or what have you. And so we're kind of losing that bit, or it seems like people don't really know how to the younger people, and even people that aren't so young, are we losing our ability to like interact?
Yeah, to socially interact. They're very happy to sit and interact on their phones,
right?
Where there's no accountability with that.
So that gets to the next thing, which is nobody knows how to like really deal with conflict or differing of opinion, because on your phone, on social media, you don't have to look somebody in the face, right? And
exactly.
So now we're terrible at, so there's all these ramifications, and are we producing and the changes in education that have been happening. A lot of people comment on, over the last 50, 60, 70 years, we're changing the way we educate people. So So but you take these kids on these international trips. Mm-hmm. So, like, what happens when they go there?
It's really interesting because
what do you see happening?
What I see is them. It's almost like a light bulb moment where they get it. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, I see now that in this country we live this way,
right?
But over here people live like this. And I also think one of the things that I try to get them to understand is how very fortunate we are to live in this country.
Yeah.
Because we have exponential wealth in this country compared to a lot of other places.
Yeah.
But our culture is also driven by different things. You go to Europe and people don't watch TV the amount that we spend in front of the television.
Right.
At all. They watch a lot of American TV because they don't produce the kind of TV that we produce here.
Well, they only do like 6 episodes in a season and then it's over.
It's over.
What are you going to watch?
Right. Yeah. When you go to France and if you go out to dinner for an evening, that is the event of the evening.
The whole
That is the whole evening, because
it
takes hours to get through all those courses, and that in of itself is an event. We're here for us to go out to eat. It's just a portion of what our evening might be.
Right. Well, and we go out to eat just because that's just how we get food.
That's just exactly. Yeah. That's how we get food.
Yeah.
And how we all, especially here in Texas, we have elbow room. I mean, our houses are large.
yeah.
They're spaced far apart. You know, you go to Europe, and I have this happen even for me. You know, by the end of the 30 days that I may be there, I'm starting to feel a little confined. I need a little elbow room.
Yeah.
And
I remember the first time I stood on the sidewalk and looked at a cafe in Paris and thought, I don't even know how I'm supposed to get in there to sit in that chair. That's, you know, all the, you know, on the side, all the tables lined up and the chairs. And I'm thinking, you know, and there's people sitting here and people sitting here and people sitting there. And there's an opening right there. And I thought, I don't know how the hell am I even supposed to, but then, but you do. You just sort of like do this thing where you get through, which is we're not used to doing that.
We're not used to that, and they're very used to, you know, bumping into each other and pardon me, and you climb all over and whatever. They're used to that. Where that's, you know, that kind of crosses our boundaries a little bit.
Like if you're like here, if you're in church and like somebody's got to get out the pew because, you know, like it's a really awkward situation.
It's
like,
very awkward.
Do I go this way? Do I stand up? Like, what do I like?
Exactly.
You know, and try
we cannot touch each other.
And, right. And if I'm the one that's trying to sneak out, right? Like I have to, you know, you don't want to like
touch anybody.
And do I go like with my front facing the people, or do I go with my back? Like, do they get to see my butt go by, or like what's
yeah.
What's
In what's
Europe,
the protocol here?
They don't worry about any of that in Europe.
No. And they're all bunched together, and they're very used to it. And one of the things, I have not been to any of the Asian countries, and that it's a goal for me because I'm one of those people that my personal bubble is kind of big. You know, I'm like, nah, back up, Jack. But I want to go over there where they literally are on your six all the time. I mean, they live on top of each other, and they live with many, many generations in one small apartment. And I'm very intrigued by that.
Yeah. It's intriguing. I'm not sure I want to experience that. I have been, it's been many years now though, but I've been to Tokyo and Hong Kong back when it was the fun Hong Kong, and one time to mainland China, Shanghai, and it's definitely
a big culture shock.
I never braved because I have a little bit of a it's not claustrophobia. Like claustrophobia is where you're afraid you're not going to be able to breathe, right? For me, it's a different thing. It's like if I'm constrained where I can't move. So like God help me if I ever have to get an MRI, I'm going to have to be drunk. So
no, you just get the open one. It's not bad.
Okay. So that whole thing where like they're getting into the subway car and they're just like pushing. Like I've seen that, but I haven't really
experienced it
because I don't think I couldn't handle it.
I would not probably like that either. But I feel like, again, I feel like it's one of those things you should experience once so that you can go, okay, yeah, I did that and I don't want to do it again.
Yeah. So, all right. So let me ask you, now you take these trips with the high school kids. Are they? Let's see. I'm trying to remember. So some of them it happens after their senior year,
right?
So you don't really see them much after that. But some of them go their junior year, right? Mm-hmm. So you get to see them. Does it like leave a mark? Do you notice on them like the next year they come back and they're like different people?
And even though it may not be something that they can point to and say, yes, this changed me this way.
Yeah.
It does make a difference in their awareness of the world and how they interact with the world now. Because now they've seen that there are other cultures than this one who live their lives differently than we do. Not wrong, just different.
Yeah.
I will go back and tell you.
And maybe have bigger problems.
Well, and I mean, one of my best memories is the first day that we were in England, and we had gone down to Trafalgar Square to meet our guide. We had come from the airport. We'd gone down to Trafalgar Square because that's where we were meeting him. And there was a big kind of a Ramadan festival going on, and this is in the heart of London. And so and also Trafalgar Square is kind of a place where a lot of the transvestites hang out. which we don't happen to see a lot of in Houston.
Not in Houston.
So we had all of that going on, and when
Ramadan and the
and the transvestites, and then as we walk away from that, and we're heading down toward the Thames, kind of taking a little
is this
walking
the naked
tour.
Viking people?
That's when the naked Viking people showed up, because that's something that they do in England. Is they allow these people who are big into the environment, they are given permission on a specific day of the month to ride naked through the streets of London. And so,
Such a great idea.
in that 45 minutes that we had literally gotten off the plane, that's a lot for a teenager to experience and take in.
That would be a lot for me, even, I think.
So, and and London being one of the most multicultural cities. I mean, Houston is a terribly multicultural city, but not to the extent that London is.
Yeah, it is now.
Yeah.
It didn't used to be.
It didn't used to be,
but it is now. Thanks to, by the way, the oil and gas industry, I think, brought a lot of people from different, a lot of people from different places. But okay, so yes, so I heard the naked Viking people story.
That's probably my favorite.
Yeah.
But you can't walk away from those experiences without having a different perspective of the world around you.
Right.
You have to. And when you hear the different languages, actually hear them being spoken on a daily basis. When you see, like I had an experience this last summer when I was in Rome. We stayed kind of out on the edge of Rome in kind of like a little suburban area. And it was like something out of an old movie. There was these three older women. It was an apartment complex, but these three older Italian women, I mean, with the aprons and the sweaters, and they were out talking to it, and the gestures, and they were laughing, and they were yelling, and it was lovely to see. It was like, okay, this is not something that's just depicted in a movie.
Yeah.
This is the
Were
way.
any of them holding phones?
No,
they weren't.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. That is, and that, right. And it's not, like you said, it wasn't a movie.
No.
They were actually living that way.
It was happening in that moment.
Well, and we used to have that. So in this country, maybe not in Houston, because Houston is a newer city, right, in comparison. But I got to believe that that historically in neighborhoods in Brooklyn or Queens, right, or certain Chicago neighborhoods or something, that, historically you had people probably,
Oh, absolutely.
out there, yelling at each other on their front porch or whatever,
Sure.
in the city.
Back when we had, it gets into kind of a prickly conversation about
It's okay. We're allowed
whether or
to have
not, whether or not, and I was reading an article about a month or so ago about whether or not segregation had actually been a good thing or a bad thing. Because when you look at places like New York City.
You're talking about the intentional segregation,
Yes,
or the natural segregation just happens when people kind of live with each other?
The intentional desegregation.
Oh, okay.
Because when you look at New York City, I mean, part of the charm of that city was always that you had those barrios, those little cultural areas, and because the Italians all lived in this one neighborhood and the Polish all lived in this one neighborhood, and they could continue the traditions that they had, that they brought with them, which was what we loved about this country, that it was this incredible melting pot, but we had all these cultures, but those cultures still existed. But then when we start desegregating and we force people to live in other places, then we lose that.
Yeah. So it's funny because I've actually been thinking about this for a while, which is, the wisdom of. So there's the melting pot idea of you have all these different cultures brought together in proximity of each other, and kind of the country benefits from this, all these different, colors and flavors and things like that.
Right.
But then there's the notion that we need to dissolve all of those, truly melt, right? And dissolve all of those things so that none of the differentiated, it all becomes one homogenized thing. And that's that's not good.
No,
I think.
And I like I was saying earlier, this year we have this delightful little group of kids that are Polish, that have this Polish background, and they're very proud of it. And they speak Polish, and they have been so. It's been so lovely to have them around and hear about their life experiences.
Do they bring pierogies for lunch? Because that would be. I'd get in on that.
They actually, we had a little Christmas program right before school let out last week, and they did bring some of the cultural foods that they eat at Christmas, and it was fascinating to me. And but I think that's so good for the kids to experience that. This is how this family celebrates Christmas because this is their cultural background.
Right. Yeah. So, sorry. So this is actually one of my favorite topics as of late because. Because this gets into another thing which I noticed. I noticed as my kids were in junior high and high school, and so you being around high schoolers, you can confirm or deny. But we don't, with all of this wanting to get rid of the noticing of. So when I grew up, and this was in New Jersey before we moved to Texas. Yeah, we were very aware of everybody's ethnicity, culture, whatever. We knew who the Italian families were. You knew who the Polish families were. You knew who right. That didn't exist down here so much.
No, I mean, growing up in West Texas.
Yeah.
There were not. I didn't have that.
Right.
I mean, it was just
right. And so my wife, who grew up in Texas, in fact, when we got married back in olden times, she was always sort of. Perplexed that I would say that I knew what I'd say, oh, well, that's a Polish name. How do you know that? Or that's a German name. How do you know that? Well, we just knew. And of course there was the usual, mostly good-natured kind of funny appreciation, kidding each other about the things that, and, you
remember when Archie Bunker used to tell the Polish jokes?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We heard a lot, we were recently talking about Don Rickles and some of the stuff that he used to get away with, but, and so now though, there's this sort of push to not really, you kind of like all of that has to go away, all that acknowledging this. And anyway, here's the point I'm getting to is it seems that kids nowadays, and actually for a few years now, don't really this word racism has been used in so many different contexts that aren't really racism. Like if I say, so if you think about the word racist fundamentally meaning I believe that one race is superior to another race.
Right.
That's not the same thing as noticing that a particular culture eats a certain thing or behaves a certain way.
Exactly.
Like, well, I went to this Indian wedding and,
right.
it was total chaos.
Right.
Well, that's kind of racist, don't you think? Right? No, it was
no,
because that's just how it is. And trust me, if you go to the Italian wedding, it's racist. It might be. It's chaos.
Well, I mean,
chaos. So, have you noticed that where the kids are sort of attributing any acknowledgement of culture to like racism?
Exactly, and things that we would perceive as. Well, it's funny. My brother and I were having this conversation the other night. It's like everybody's lost their sense of humor.
Yeah.
Because the things that we would joke about, I mean, down here, of course, it used to be Aggie jokes, and a lot of the Aggie jokes were actually Polish jokes.
Yeah, I was going to say, when we moved here, it was the same jokes, only they were Aggie jokes.
They were Aggie jokes,
Polish jokes. Yeah.
So, but it was, nobody took it personally.
Right.
It was not, it was just a joke, and it was funny.
Yeah.
But now it's almost like everybody's lost that. It's like that boundary has been blurred out, or I don't know. It's just like everything.
Weird.
Everything
and
now
even if it's not a joke, even if it's just acknowledging, like even if it's just saying, it was if you say, well, it was Asian food, so there was a lot of rice.
Right.
Like, is that racist? Like, because I noticed that Asian people eat a lot of rice.
A lot of rice.
Also, Latin American people eat a lot of rice, and also like a lot of. And I'm having a hard time coming up with examples, but I hear this all the time, where the younger people are like, if you observe anything about a particular culture that's a particular way, then somehow it becomes
racist.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, it is, and it's kind of like the renaming of all the football teams, because now all of a sudden we're being.
I thought it was funny that we had to rename the Redskins part of the name, but we didn't have to rename the Washington part of the name. And
right.
George Washington owned slaves, so
yeah.
So shouldn't we rename that part too?
Yeah, but that gets into a whole other conversation, right?
Yeah,
because.
Then we got to rename the capital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is part of our culture. It is part of our history.
It's there. Yeah.
We can't erase it.
Right.
And taking down statues and not allowing books in the library doesn't change it.
Yeah.
So how do we handle that?
Yeah. So what do you what I don't want to. So I know you have your own perspectives. I feel like I keep wanting to ask you, like, what do you see the youngsters doing? Because you have a front row seat to that, right?
Number one, they're just,
and we're wondering whether they're going to be able to there's this worry among the people our age that we're producing this generation that isn't going to be able to do very well, and I think every older generation, we said this before, worries that. But
well, in some ways I agree, and in some ways I disagree.
Okay.
For one, this generation is so much more open-minded and accepting because they've been exposed to so much more than we have.
Open-minded and accepting of what?
Of all kinds of cultural differences, of personal differences, of gender differences. They're much more kind of live and let live than maybe our generation was. Not that we weren't, but we weren't really exposed to it on the level that they are.
Not as much. Now there's the one in the middle, right? So,
but then that leads to another observation: is that, are we exposing these kids to too much too soon? And that's where technology comes in.
Yeah.
The things these kids are exposed to in high school, I didn't even know existed when I was in high school.
Yeah.
There's really no way to stop them from being exposed. I mean, sure, you can limit what they see on their phone and but the fact is they can get around all that.
Right.
So I kind of, in some ways, I think they're smarter, but in other ways, I feel like we've robbed them of that innocence of childhood, and that they're adults so soon, or they're exposed to adult things so early.
Right. Yeah. I could. Yeah. So they're exposed to. So here's the weird part, right? Is they're exposed to these more adult-oriented ideas or concepts or realities or what have you, but at the same time they're not given the same life interaction, right? It's all happening on the screen,
right?
So part of what enables us, at least when I think about for me growing up, part of what enabled us to adjust to is as we learned more about all the things in life, but you also have this interpersonal growth dynamic thing that's happening, and it all sort of, you know what I mean?
I do. And the other thing that I see that is, to me, is disturbing is that these children or these young kids coming up, they don't have an imagination. When you and I grew up, we went outside and we pretended.
Yeah,
We
I still
pretended.
do.
Yeah,
we're doing it right now.
Yeah. I mean, we played cops and robbers, or we played. I mean, I can remember spending hours on my bicycle.
Cowboys and Indians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We played Cowboys and Indians.
Yeah.
You played, the cashier at the grocery store,
Right.
or, we would spend hours on our bicycles and we would dig through people's trash and we would hunt treasures. And
We avoided mentioning playing doctor. That's a whole other conversation.
that's a whole other conversation. But we could imagine, we lived in our imaginations.
Yes, we could. Yes.
These kids don't have to live in their imagination because they can step right into their technology.
Yeah.
And so their brains don't have the ability to visualize what something could be.
So you probably see this up close because being a theater teacher, do you find that it's harder and harder for them to get out of their heads and
get out of their or to really give themselves over to that kind of creative play. And that creative play is what keeps us sane, but it also enables us to grow our minds.
Yeah.
And they can't do that now without help. Where you and I just did it naturally. Now we have to kind of like push them into that situation.
Yeah. So the question is, do these developments or anti-developments, in terms of our ability as a society to continue to improve and provide, this American dream concept of there's a good life out there potentially for everybody. Each generation does better. Are we these types of things that we're observing? Do they stop our evolution in that way, or does it just change what life looks like?
Well, I think that's hard to say because I think we're early into that. I think if you look back at how the pandemic has changed us.
I heard about that.
As I consider myself to be in the arts or an artist, would any of us survived any of that if it hadn't been for the arts? Because what were we dependent on? We watched TV, we listened to music. The arts are so much a part of our survival.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
But that takes creativity.
Personally, I really enjoyed being able to go to Home Depot and there was nobody there and I didn't have to wait in line.
True.
So, I'm actually missing part of it a little bit, though.
But how much did you do things you wouldn't normally do? Like how much did you listen to music where you might not normally have done that?
Absolutely right.
How much did you read where you might not normally have done that because we were so isolated? And I think we found out that when we talk about a democratic society, art is very much a part of that. And artists are part of our social conscience. They're part of who speaks for the common people. And so when we don't have that kind of art coming out in the ways that you and I are used to it, which would be, music, television, theater, is that going to change the landscape of how our culture is? But then you have to look at the art that they are creating. And these kids now, the technology and the stuff they're doing with computers, it's just a new kind of art that you and I aren't familiar with.
But it's an equivalent exercise of the artistic...
Of the creative process.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, it's real easy. As much as I love to sit here, I could go on all day about how... all the things in today's society that aren't like it used to be,
right?
With the notion that by definition that's no good. It's no good for me because I don't like it, right? But if I abstract my personal feelings and say, does this help or hurt society,
right?
Or does it hurt society or does it just change society? I think there's probably some things that fall into both camps.
Well, and if you look back to my brother and I were talking the other day, it's like every day we sound more and more like our parents, because the changes that society was going through when they were the parents of teenage children are those changes are still happening now. They're different changes, but they're still happening. I mean, remember when, the Beatles, the drama over the Beatles and Elvis and rock and roll music, and this was going to be the downfall of society and whatever, and it wasn't.
Yeah. Well,
maybe.
It might have been the beginning. Could have been the beginning of it.
Yeah.
As much as I am an Elvis fan and a Beatles fan, but I can understand why some people and we came kind of after that, right? We were little when that, but I can understand why some people can look at the overall trajectory of things and go, it all kind of started back here,
right?
And then we could have a lot of arguments about what that, where
that looks like.
But there was definitely a change in the way, like as Americans and maybe as Western culture, the way that people thought about life and people, and like somewhere in there, in like between the 50s and the 60s, things started to
change. I mean, is on multiple levels, because things especially started to change for women at that point.
You mentioned that earlier.
And again, I think it goes back, coming full circle, it goes back to what we visualize as the American dream, what you and I grew up with,
right?
What we visualize as the American dream. If we sat down with a teenager today, would be totally different.
Yeah, what would it be? I'm curious. So
I don't know. I think we'd have to get a teenager in here. I mean, they still want the same things. I mean, to them, it's
and we're discussing this, and we're spanning a couple of. So we're saying our generation and this one, but there's a couple of
in between. Yeah,
you're right, because we talked about this. I think it was before we turned on the stuff, but you and I are kind of at the very front of the Gen X,
right?
So I don't know about you, but growing up, I could, I kind of had like baby boomers on this side and Gen X on this side. I'm kind of in the middle.
Well,
right?
And I have an older sister and a younger brother.
Yeah. So then we had like the rest of Gen X that happened. Then we had the millennials that happened. So those are people now, for the most part, who are probably in their 30s, right? And then you've got what they're now called Gen Y. No, millennials are Gen Y. You have Gen Z, which are the kids that have been coming out of school the last few years, and they're very different from the millennials,
right?
Who are very different from the. So it'd be interesting if we. So the first question is, if we asked any of those, the ones that came after us, specifically, mostly the ones in recent years, if we asked them about the American dream, would that even be a term that they're familiar with?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Well, it might be, because they still learn enough history to know that, because that's kind of part of that industrial revolution kind of, early 1900s, Henry Ford, the American dream, kind of all in that part of history.
Okay,
study.
right.
But I think how we perceive it is very different. Where you and I grew up with, the American dream of owning a home, having a family, you, and I guess, and really even that, if you think about it, is very much part of your family culture. I mean, if you grew up in the Northeast and your dad worked for the steel mill, well, then generally it was expected that you would go work for the steel mill.
Right.
Or you would go work in the coal mines. I didn't grow up with that in my family. It wasn't that way. But the whole idea of going to college, being successful, we're really seeing that going to college mindset start to kind of shift.
Yeah? What's it shifting to?
Shifting to more of going to vocational school.
So is that really, I mean, I've heard that, but I wonder whether that's really happening.
Yeah, it really is happening.
Wow.
Because
after I've already paid for the college and everything, right?
Yeah. But because especially if with the technology industry, they don't need all that extra liberal arts stuff to go work for one of these big tech companies.
That brings up the other question, which is, what happens when we stop teaching? What happens when, as a society, nobody's got that liberal arts background anymore? And it's not just about the arts, like the like I'm sure we're going to continue to have music and
Sure.
and TV, and it's all going to suck. But
Unfortunately.
but because it's not for entertainment anymore right now.
Well, and there's nobody going. I mean, think about it. When was the last time? Can you name? I mean, I knew growing up who all the big writers were of Broadway musicals. Of course, that
Yeah.
was kind of, my mother was very into that, but those people are all gone.
Yeah,
and
you're
they're
not
not being replaced.
But what about the teaching, like just having a society of people who have a broad enough education that they know how to think along different lines? It would probably come as a surprise to a lot of people now to know that many, during certain periods of time, and I don't necessarily mean the Middle Ages, but in the last couple hundred years, many scientists were also philosophers, right? Science and literature and art and like all of these things were kind of commingled in this like broad education.
Because
Not everybody got that education,
because
right?
they were all deemed
Right,
important.
because some people are selling flowers in Covent Garden, but
Right.
but lots of people are having. I just threw that in because I know you're a kind of an
Yeah.
Anglophile. Yeah. So what happens when we go a couple of generations of only teaching, and like I'm with the whole vocational thing because I think a lot of people have wasted enormous amounts
college
of
material.
time and money
Yeah.
in college. But even in college, it seems to me that they stopped. Like it's been a long time that they started teaching more for specialization, more so, and less. More people are going for specialized careers and specialized educations, and less people for. So what does that do to us?
I don't know. I mean, I think that we are starting to see how the children of these other generations. I mean, I really think that we're starting to see the effect of, having television available 24/7.
Yeah. Don't get me started on that.
I mean, how these things are affecting
Right.
how our culture operates and continues to evolve.
Yeah.
And I know there are days when I think, oh my gosh, this generation's never going to make it.
Yeah.
And yet they have moments of brilliance that I'm like, wow, I would never have thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. I mean, and
Because whenever I think about it, like just Logan's Run comes to mind. Like these very shallow, mindless
Yeah.
people, and everything's kind of figured out. And
well, I mean, we were having this conversation. I was having this conversation with actually the art teacher, and her husband and I were having this because we're huge BritBox fans because we love British murder mystery kind of things, and we just find American television to be really.
by the way, we watched all of it as time goes by, the whole thing.
It's wonderful,
It's
isn't it?
It's fantastic.
It's fantastic.
I wish there was more.
I know.
Yeah.
But I mean, we love these British,
Yeah.
and I love British television because I find American television
It's kind of fake.
fake and really simple, and it's
Yes,
not really challenging to me.
simple, yeah.
Yeah. So which makes me then wonder, where is our culture?
Yeah. Right. Right.
Where are we standing here educationally?
Yeah. How often anymore do you make a reference? If you reference anything that happened like more than 20 years ago, most people don't know what you're talking about.
Well,
and it's not just young people.
Well, that's the big joke in my classroom is that before you leave this school, you will know who William Shakespeare is, and you will know who Bruce Springsteen is. That's the two things that I will make sure you know before you leave this classroom.
Yeah. This is where we diverge a little bit. I have trouble sharing your Springsteen enthusiasm, even though when I was a kid in New Jersey, "Born to Run" was the big song.
Yeah.
In fact, there was I think it was just like not even rumors, but like urban legend that New Jersey was going to make "Born to Run" the state anthem of New Jersey. I don't think states have anthems, but
Well, we have the Eyes of Texas.
Eyes of Texas.
That's the state song.
Is that or is it the Yellow Rose of Texas?
Is it the Yellow Rose? I don't know. Obviously, I should know. I'm a native, but I
think they're
don't.
the same song, actually.
Yeah, it could be. It's the same tune.
And we also have this. I have this argument with the guys that you watched for 4 years, because I'm pretty sure that Shakespeare wasn't really a real a person. I think that Shakespeare was a bunch of people that got together and did some stuff.
I think he was part of that group. I won't go so far as to say he didn't exist.
Yeah,
because
okay.
I do think he did. But I think there was a group,
Well, there's a statue of
conglomerate.
him, so, yeah.
But there was a conglomerate of Ben Jonson and those guys that all kind of wrote together in that period of time, and then they'd get in the pub at night and talk and
crank some. But and the only reason I think that isn't because I've done any research. I only like to think that because it bothers people who don't think that way.
Yeah.
But okay. But now I know that you're kind of in that. All right, that's good to know. Will, how are we doing? Oh, geez, we're at we're see. Look at that. Almost an hour goes by.
Almost an hour.
And all right, so let's wrap up. Anything like on your mind that you kept wanting to say that we didn't get to? You went into the women thing a little bit, but
yeah, a little bit. I don't
really like to talk about women, though.
I think it's something to be watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the women. I would be interested to see how marriage and family changes in this culture.
Well, I was just going to say that because the biggest thing. So I let it not be said that I am opposed to women doing anything in particular, but you can't deny that once. The change in what women are doing began to have an impact. It changes the family,
the family dynamic, absolutely, yeah.
And whether that's been good or bad is, I don't think we know yet.
Nope.
Yeah.
And we may not know in our lifetime.
Yeah, because it's kind of still playing out.
Right.
But and from there we could get into a lot of communist conspiracies about who's trying to tear us down. But anything else?
Nope.
Is that good? All right. Well,
good.
Thanks for and boy, what a crappy day to come out. I'm sorry we made you come out in the cold
Houston.
and the rain.
By the time I go outside, the sun will be shining.
The sun might be shining. But we do have coming up. So this is the week before Christmas. People aren't going to see this before Christmas. It'll be after Christmas, and they'll wonder why the hell is he wearing that sweater. But this is the week.
And I really wish you'd told me because I could have ugly sweatered you.
I didn't know until right before I left the house. I kid you not, I didn't even know this was in the closet, and I found it, and I thought, well, I got to wear the sweater. So it's almost Christmas. So Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And thanks for making time.
My pleasure.
All right.
Been fun.
We're done.